What's up y'all, it's Izzy, and I enjoyed last week's video so much that I decided to torture myself and make this video for you guys this week. Plus, I can't ever seem to film this video right when I'm filming in person, so I thought maybe having graphics would help me. Today we're going to be talking about insulation. So one of the most stressful things that comes along with deciding on insulation is the question of R value. What is it? So in order to understand that, you have to understand how insulation works. So I drew this diagram for you guys. Insulation is essentially just a sort of buffer. It's a material that holds a bunch of little air pockets inside of it, and those air pockets help distribute the air from the inside and outside, so it kind of helps create this buffer, as I'm saying, in the middle. So it allows the cold air to stay inside and the hot air to stay outside, or vice versa. So essentially R value, a higher R value just means thicker insulation because there are more air bubbles. But don't buy a higher R value insulation with the intent of insulating your space better, because smushing it into small of a space will pop the air bubble and cause the insulation to lose its value. Okay, so now let's move along and talk about another concept I like to discuss when talking about insulation, because I feel like it's kind of hard to wrap your head around sometimes, and that is a thermal break. In this example, we're going to be mainly focusing on the ceiling, so here I've drawn out half the ceiling from a front view and what you'd see from the ceiling on the inside, and the darker gray represents the beams, while the lighter gray represents the interior metal. So as the sun comes up and heats the top of the bus will then begin to heat the metal beams on the inside of the bus, and that will spread to the interior metal, making it really hot and kind of unbearable inside the bus. But if you were to place something like plywood over top of those beams, when the sun goes to heat it up, there is a break in the temperature or the heat, and it allows it to not transfer that heat directly into the bus. So now that we have some of those more complex topics out of the way, let's dive right into just talking about the insulation itself. So I've broken it down into two main categories: eco-friendly and traditional. Under eco-friendly we have wool, hemp, cellulose, and denim, while the more traditional are usually labeled as fiberglass, rock wool, and foam. Now these are not the only types of insulation available, these are just the ones I decided to highlight. And first on the list we have wool. Now wool is growing in popularity among van lifers and bus lifers, and for good reason. It's a natural fiber insulation, it's moisture wicking capabilities, which is good when you're in a tin can, it's breathable, but some of the cons is that it's not really widely available and it can be quite costly, though they are making it a little bit less inexpensive now with their, especially Havelock wool, with their lines specifically for van lifers and Skoolies. On the other hand, you have hemp, which is very similarly marketed as to the wool. It's a natural fiber, but again, it's not very widely available and it's not very cost effective. It's also not made specifically for the narrow cavities inside vans and buses. Now there are other insulation marketed as eco-friendly available in your local hardware store. Probably first on the list would be cellulose insulation, which is made from recycled paper. It's a loose fill insulation, and because of that it's not really ideal for all types of applications, as you would need to find the mesh netting that the professionals use to install it, and that's quite hard to track down. And also it settles over time, so it's not really good for motion going down the road unless you need to get into some tight spaces. Going along with that, we also have denim insulation. It's of course recycled denim. It does have impeccable soundproofing capabilities, but the only problem that I can seem to find with it is that it absorbs water. Earlier I spoke about being inside of a tin can, and in a tin can it does tend to sweat when the weather outside is significantly different from the weather inside, which is not good if you have denim insulation, because the denim will then absorb that insulation, as it is mostly 100% cotton, which is what cotton does. So if I haven't got anything that would fit your preferences yet, have no fear, because traditional insulation is here. So first on the list is fiberglass, and it's just as it sounds. It's woven glass fibers. It's probably the most inexpensive out of all the ones that I'm going to talk about today, and it has a range of R values. The only cons I can find with it is you can't split it up to go into smaller spaces that I'm aware of without getting the itchy oochies, and it doesn't repel water in the best that it could, I guess. And by that I mean I'm comparing it of course to rock wool, and that's exactly how it sounds too. It's woven rock fibers, and it is actually hydrophobic. It will repel the water, and it can be split relatively easy, and I find that it doesn't itch really. The only downside is it can be more expensive than fiberglass, but it is definitely not the most expensive insulation on this list. Those are of course the ones that you will find closer to the beginning. If you were to go out right now and ask any person that owns a tiny house or a Skoolie or anything what insulation they have in their bus, most often than not, you're probably going to get the answer of spray foam, because it's usually fairly cheap per square foot, and though it's usually professionally installed, it can be DIY installed. There are kits for that, but if you don't get the ratio mixed together like you should, it does have the potential to off-gas, and it won't let your bus breathe as much as other insulations may, which could be a good thing in sometimes, and it could be a bad thing in others. And I talked about foam before, like I listed just foam by itself, but that included foam board too. It has really good rigidity, so if you needed something like that for perhaps a floor, that would be good for it, but of course it's not ideal for all applications. And to come up with a con, of course I have to say that it's annoying to maneuver those big sheets around because they kind of flop around and they're kind of hard to cut, but that's just me trying to come up with something to nag about. Now I had to just put a quick note in there for you all who are eco-conscious like me. Sustainability and eco-friendly living doesn't always mean the obvious green choice in an insulation. Sometimes it means going with the energy efficient option, because that is really the sustainable option. And I didn't really ever think about this before, but Belinda Carr really opened my eyes to this. She was super helpful when I was trying to pick out insulation, so I definitely recommend going to check out her channel, and I'll leave that below. Now if you guys are curious as to my picks, yes, I really wanted to go with Havelock wool. I wanted to do so many things, but of course it wasn't in my budget at the time, especially someone who was building during a global pandemic. So what I decided to go with in the end, what I thought would be most energy efficient and best for the Skoolie, was to do the walls and ceilings with rock wool and do the floors with that foam board, because I wanted something that had a little bit of rigidity to it, and of course filling the wheel wells with cellulose insulation, only because it was nice to be able to get in the nooks and crannies with that insulation, and I thought that would work well given its R value, but also because I may or may not have wanted an excuse to make paper clay. So you guys have caught me. Please share the insulations that you use down in the comments below, and if you have any questions, also feel free to put them there. If I don't come along to answer them, or if I don't know the answer, I'm sure someone else will come along that will know the answer. And thank you guys so much for watching. Stay tuned for the rest of this week's video that will focus on how I went about framing my bus, doing the rough framing, and if that interests you, that will be what the rest of this week is focused on. And I hope you guys have a wonderful week. Bye.